Hi there, and welcome to this series of tutorials on game development in C++. This series is rather different to the other resources available online. Rather than dictating stuff for you to memorize or taking you through the development of a single game, I'll instead try and teach you how to structure your games at a fundamental level. One of the things I found most difficult when learning how to make games was not the ins and outs of getting things on the screen, responding to player input, dealing with object collisions, and laying out level designs, but how to implement these ideas within a robust code structure. At this point in your learning, this may seem an overblown concern. Just code away, and it'll all fall together. However, without a proper design, without the correct elements binding your code together, it can become incredibly hard to maintain what you've already written and add new features. A good game development tutorial should not be teaching you how to use C++ or how to get a grip on rendering graphics, but how to bring this all together into a well-designed game. Even though we'll only make a few simple games together, hopefully this series will provide you with the skills and resources to go on and implement your own, far more complicated and personalized projects. Once we get past the first few tutorials introducing the basics of making graphical games, the videos will be split between theory and practical. The theory will outline a concept, and the practical will add it to one of the games we're developing. Note, once beyond the introduction, our games will compile at the end of every tutorial. This is a key idea in modern game development. Add a feature, compile, and testing before adding another is much better than adding all the features before realizing you have a million bugs. It's also fun playing your game. These tutorials will therefore not focus on the application of a concept in particular, but on why that concept is a good idea, and how, in a pretty fundamental way, it works. I'll move fast, and it's assumed that you have a good knowledge of C++. By good, I mean you're pretty damn comfortable with the basics. We're learning how to make games, not learning C++ through making games. We won't use any of the more exotic features of the language, like templates, complex use of the standard template library, lambda functions, etc. So if you want to implement these in a game, you'll have to do it yourself. The reason why we won't be covering this stuff is because I'm no expert and wouldn't know how to teach it. However, we will slowly move into using classes in a pretty big way. So whilst you don't need to have a deep knowledge of object-oriented programming, you should definitely at least know what it is. See the stuff linked below for where to go for extra C++ learning materials if the future tutorials are too complicated. So, before we begin, I'll go over the structure of the lessons ahead. Firstly, it's important to emphasize that at no point will I be writing any code which I expect you to just pass over. This is something that annoyed me in the tutorials that I learned from. You'll understand every line and how it fits into the program. So lesson 1 is fairly hefty. It'll cover the basics. What an API is and how we use it, the overall structure of a good game, some stuff about the preprocessor and managing large projects, an introduction to SDL, which is the API that we'll be using. I will be using code blocks, which is what this is here, the GNU GCC compiler and the Windows 7 operating system for these tutorials. That's my setup, and the accompanying project files available for download will fit right into code blocks. But it's important to understand that the code itself will work on any IDE, integrated development environment, any text editor, any compiler, or any operating system. This lesson, lesson 1, should give you the knowledge and resources to make the code we'll write together work anywhere that C++ has a compiler and SDL has an implementation. If you're working on a Mac, if you're working on a Linux system, if you're working on Windows and you want to use Visual Studio, whatever, this lesson should teach you how to set up your environment and understand what's happening. I think that's an important thing which some other tutorials don't address. So, in lesson 1.5, we'll be writing Pong. This might seem an awful lot to get down in half a lesson, but we'll be deliberately writing the simplest possible game. This is really just to provide a base of future tutorials and a quick implementation of SDL. Lesson 2 we'll cover the game loop and getting the time step correct. I won't explain what a time step is now, you'll have to wait till lesson 2. Lesson 3 will move all of our code into classes. Lesson 4 will cover coding style, something to nail down before we move on to more complicated things. Lesson 5 will cover input devices and writing some classes to deal with these. Lesson 6 will move on to audio, both how it works in SDL and the many ways of implementing it in a game. In Lesson 7 we'll write our second game, BREAKOUT. However, this is much more of an exercise than a tutorial. I won't show you how to make the game, but rather how the concepts we've already covered fit into it. But of course, if you walk into issues, the full code will be available online. In Lesson 8, we'll cover the really meaty stuff. Game design patterns. The implementation video will show how these can be fitted both into our Pong clone and into BREAKOUT. In Lesson 9, we'll cover issues particular to platform games, so like tiling, moving backgrounds, randomizing levels, and so on. The implementation video will go about putting together an original platform game, so there you go, another way. In Lesson 10, we'll write another game from scratch. This will bring everything that we've learnt together throughout the entirety of this series. What game exactly this will be, I don't know yet. I'll be taking suggestions as the videos are released. Lesson 11 will be a bonus video adding some little features to all 4 games that we've made so far. So, you may have noticed that all 11 of these lessons deal in 2 dimensions. Programming directly in 3D, that is, without using a game engine someone has made for you already, is extremely hard. It requires the use of a very complicated graphics API, such as Ogre 3D, DirectX or OpenGL. Most of the tutorial series will consist of the right way to use this API, and I plan to focus on the game making itself. I'll do another series on making 3D games at some point, however this may not come for a long while. Anyway, at this point, after you've finished lesson 11, you should have everything in your toolbox to start making 3D games, from documentation, reference materials and tutorials available online. So, that's the introduction. On to lesson 1.